Went out for a curry last night with a friend of mine, Andy Good. Some of you might know, don't matter if you don't. And just great to catch up. Andy's been through very difficult personal circumstances, the breakup of his marriage, through a difficult time in the development of his own children, who are all in their late teens now. And it was great just catching up with Andy, but it reminded me of a day about, I guess it's about 6 or 7 years ago, when Andy and I went on a trip to France to visit another friend of Challenge Community Church, Mark Smalley. And Andy and I were over there looking at whether we could take our leadership training program for a week to France every year as part of our the program, the Want to Lead program, and we thought we could do outdoor pursuits in France and have a week of Bible teaching over there. But it was a quiet moment when the three of us were sat around just reflecting on where our own personal lives were, and Mark shared with us how he had been through a time of brokenness in his own life, and been through a time of depression really while he and his wife were out on the mission field. And Andy was just going through the mill at that time, and he was sharing about how difficult things had been for him. And Mark Smalley said something. He said, you know, unless you really do go through brokenness, your ministry is not going to be very effective. You know, God really only uses broken vessels. And I'll be quite honest with you, as I sat listening to those two really good friends of mine, my heart missed a few beats, because I thought, oh pants, I've not really had a lot of brokenness. What is around the corner? I genuinely thought, oh dear, if my ministry is going to have any success, I'm going to go through brokenness, and I kind of am a bit scared to know what that might be. And I kind of was quite happy to disagree with their theory that God only uses broken vessels, or most uses broken vessels, until a few months later. I guess I didn't notice how it started. I just got more and more tired. When I was in planning meetings, I had no excitement for anything. When I was preparing for preaching, it was like it was becoming drudgery. It was hard work. And every time I preached, I was exhausted, completely exhausted afterwards. I was going to bed for more in the afternoons and struggling. And then I got the flu, or what I thought was the flu. Don't know whether it was the flu or not, to be honest, but it lasted for weeks, and weeks turned to months. And at the end of January 2005, I had effectively a health collapse. One Sunday evening, about 9:30, I decided I just couldn't cope anymore. This flu thing was getting worse, and I went out of my living room and got down on my hands and knees and crawled on my hands and knees up the stairs. And I felt like my head was going to explode. I felt like I couldn't get any oxygen into my lungs. And I thought I was going to die. And I kind of whispered to Rachel, who just not long put the girls in bed, "Love, you might have to call an ambulance because I think I'm dying." Now, unfortunately, because she's a woman and I'm a man, she didn't really take it that seriously. You know, what man says, "I think I'm dying," and his wife really pays attention? But genuinely, I thought that was the end. And I more or less just collapsed in a heap in the bed. And that was the beginning of what ultimately was diagnosed as ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome. I spent the best part of, or the worst part, if you like, of the next 6 weeks in bed. I spent 6 months effectively recuperating and recovering. And every time I felt better, I tried to do something. It put me 1 step forward, 2 steps back. During that period, I hit absolute rock bottom. All my old doubts about my Christian faith came to the surface. All my questioning about why God was allowing this to happen to me came to the surface. all my frustration and anger came out, my resentment. I remember going through a period of being angry because we discovered early on in that illness Rachel was pregnant with our third child, and how on earth were we going to cope with this pregnancy? And it was the worst of her 3 pregnancies. She was very poorly during it, and I just remember just feeling so low and miserable. God, why are you doing this? Why are you letting this happen to me? And just being so angry and frustrated. There were a few high points. A guy phoned me. He lives in the Forest of Dean. He's a Christian, and he said, "I hear you're not well." I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty bad." And I told him about it. I was just lying in bed feeling sorry for myself, and he said, "Can I pray for you?" I said, "All prayers welcome." He said, "No, right now on the phone." And this guy prayed for me on the phone, and just knowing that there was someone on the end of the line who was praying, not just for me, but praying with me, was fantastic. Actually having people pray with me was a big thing, and it kind of didn't happen enough, which is something I've learned possibly to feed back into the lives of others. And when he hung up the phone, I felt well enough to go downstairs and integrate with the family for an hour or two. That was 2005. It's 2012 now. And although I still have ME, I look back to that time as a time when I was really broken. I was broken physically, I was broken emotionally, I was broken spiritually. And bit by bit, coming out of it, I had to reassess where I was with my life, where my family life was, where my ministry was, what God was calling me to do. And I'll be quite honest with you, it was coming out of that I felt God's challenge on my life again. And the challenge was effectively this: I called you to plant a church, Challenge Community Church. And so far you've done a rubbish job, but I'm giving you a second chance. Reminds me of the Apostle Peter. I talked about this when I was preaching at Challenge just recently. He denied the Lord 3 times, and then on that beach, after a beach barbecue, when Peter must have felt so terrible that he hardly ate a thing, because he denied the Lord 3 times, and Jesus hadn't said anything to him directly about it, and Jesus gives him a nod and a wink and says, "Peter, let's go for a walk." And they go for a walk along the beach, and 3 times Jesus says, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter says eventually, "Lord, you know I love you." And then he hears those fantastic words. Jesus says, "Follow me." And when you go through a period of brokenness, if you allow God to use that brokenness and allow God to do in your life what he needs to do, and what probably he couldn't do unless he allowed you to become broken, then you're never going to get to that fantastic point, as Jesus said to Peter on the beach, after he had wiped the slate clean of his broken betrayal or denial and sin. With the words, "You know I love you," Jesus gave him his calling again. The first 2 words that Peter ever heard were, "Follow me." And the words that he heard on the beach after the resurrection were the same words again, "Follow me." And the words I heard were, "I called you to plant a church, now get on and plant the church." And from 2005 onwards, although the next 2 or 3 years were difficult, it was the beginning of a new period in the life of Challenge Community Church, and in my life and in my ministry. And I can honestly say that although we're still not a big church, we're maybe about 80 on a Sunday morning, God's doing something beautiful. And in my personal experience, that beauty has come from brokenness. And I guess in your experience too, that you may be in a broken place right now, but can I encourage you, give your brokenness to God. Don't hold on to it. Don't wrap yourself in it like a blanket. Don't find comfort in the brokenness. Scream out. Ask God to help you. Ask him what he's doing. Cry to him. God, why are you allowing this to happen? And I promise you that God's desire is not to break you, but to bring beauty from your brokenness. And that's the story of people in Challenge Community Church. That's the story of people all around the world whose lives God has touched. We constantly pray, "God bless me, God bless me, God bless me." And sometimes God puts on his prayer filter and he hears, "God break me, God break me, God break me." And actually that's the only way to blessing. Jacob, the deceiver, the twister, the liar, is on his way back to Esau. The first time he's going to see Esau after cheating him out of his inheritance. And he wrestles with God all night. Doesn't realise it's God until the last minute. And God doesn't beat him. And Jacob, realizing who it is, says to God, "Bless me." And the wrestler that wrestled with him all night just reaches his finger out and touches the socket of Jacob's hip. And it must have been instantaneous, excruciating pain. And Jacob, who was walking back worried about meeting Esau, now he's not worried about it all, because God's broken him. He's already been to the absolute rock bottom. His hip has been dislocated. He walks with a limp. And I think, if you read the scriptures, that Jacob walked with a limp from that day on. But that moment of brokenness changed Jacob's outlook. And it was from that place that the blessing really started to happen. And so wherever you are in your brokenness, can I encourage you? God wants to bring blessing, and he wants to bring beauty. That's why we believe that one of our values at Challenge is God wants to bring beauty from brokenness.